Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My best friend since high school was this guy who had the biggest heart you could imagine. He was the type of person who'd give you the shirt off his back without thinking twice. What made him really special though was how much he loved animals, especially his two Labrador retrievers. He had a chocolate one and a black one, and those dogs were literally his whole world. He'd talk about them constantly at work, show pictures, and even bring them to the shop sometimes when he'd visit. When he died suddenly from a heart attack at 32, our whole town was shocked. Nobody saw it coming. He was healthy, active, always smiling. The funeral was packed with people whose lives he'd touched somehow. About a week after we buried him, his sister asked me to help sort through his belongings. She knew how close we were and figured I'd know what was important to him. So I drove over to his house, which felt eerily quiet without his laugh filling the rooms. The first thing I did was check on his dogs. They were clearly depressed, barely eating, just lying around looking lost. I fed them and took them out to the backyard, trying to give them some comfort. That's when this woman just walked into the yard like she owned the place. She was probably in her 50s with that haircut that screams trouble. You know the one. She walked right up to me with this authority that made my skin crawl. She announced that she was here for the dogs. When I asked who she was, she explained that she ran the local dog rescue organization and had heard about the owner's death. She claimed she was there to take the animals into proper care. I stared at her and told her that nobody had asked her to come. I explained that the family hadn't decided what they were doing yet. She brushed off my concerns and said this was standard procedure. When pet owners die, she explained, they rehome the animals because it's what's best for them. I told her that wasn't her decision to make and that she needed to leave. She rolled her eyes like I was some stupid kid and said, I didn't understand how this worked. She claimed to have the authority to take these dogs, and that's exactly what she was going to do. She pulled out leashes and started walking toward the dogs. I stepped right in front of her and repeated that she wasn't taking them anywhere. She got angry and said she'd be back with the police. She wanted me to see who had the real authority here. She stormed off, but something about her attitude made my stomach turn. I immediately called his sister to warn her. His sister was shocked and asked what gave this woman permission to do anything. She told me they were keeping the dogs in the family and had already talked about this. I said I didn't think this woman cared what they had decided. I was right to be worried. 3 days later, his sister called me in tears and said that woman had taken them. She explained that the woman came back with a police officer and took both dogs. My blood boiled. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the dog rescue facility. Karen was standing behind the front desk when I walked in, and the second she saw me, this smug smile spread across her face. She reminded me that she had told me she'd handle this properly and said the dogs were in good hands now. I angrily told her she had no right to take them and that they belonged with his family. She disagreed and said she actually had every right. She bragged about knowing the law and having connections in this town. She called me nobody and said there was nothing I could do about it. I told her we'd see about that. She laughed and said I should go ahead and try, but I'd just waste my time and money. That night, I started making phone calls. I reached out to every lawyer, animal rights group, and local news station I could find. The story started spreading through our small town, and people were furious. Everyone knew how much those dogs meant to my friend, and seeing them stolen like this didn't sit right with anyone. I kept going back to the rescue demanding to see the dogs, but Karen always had me turned away. She seemed to enjoy watching me get frustrated. During one visit, she asked if I was still trying to play hero and told me to give it up already. I said I wasn't giving up on them. She replied that I should because she always gets what she wants. Then something amazing happened. One of Karen's own volunteers contacted me secretly. She was uncomfortable with how the whole situation was handled. The volunteer told me she needed to share something about how Karen operates. She explained that Karen doesn't always follow proper procedures when she wants certain animals. She revealed that Karen had bragged about using her police connections to get those dogs. I asked if she was willing to help me prove that. She said yes and agreed that what Karen did was wrong. Armed with this insider information, I found a lawyer who specialized in animal rights cases. He was so disgusted by the story that he agreed to work for free. He called the situation completely unethical and said we were filing a formal complaint immediately. While the legal case built momentum, I organized a peaceful protest outside the rescue. Local news crews showed up and the story went viral in our area. Public opinion turned completely against Karen. The day everything came crashing down for her was beautiful. Police arrived at the rescue with a search warrant. They found forged adoption papers for the dogs and several other illegal activities in her records. I watched from across the street when they led Karen out in handcuffs. She was screaming the whole time about how ridiculous this was and claiming she was the victim. She yelled that we'd all regret this. I quietly said to myself that no, we wouldn't. The dogs were returned to his sister that same day. When I brought them to her house, she broke down crying and hugged them so tight. They seemed to understand they were finally safe. The rescue was permanently shut down and Karen faced multiple fraud charges. Her reputation was completely destroyed and she eventually had to leave town. My son has been my lifeline during our shopping trips, helping me reach items on higher shelves and navigate the crowded aisles. Being in a wheelchair and dealing with breathing issues from my condition makes simple tasks like grocery shopping into major undertakings. But my son never complains about helping out his old mom. We'd made this trip countless times before. The routine was always the same I'd read from my carefully organized shopping list, while my son would grab the items and place them in our cart. The employees at this store knew us well by now, always greeting us with warm smiles and asking how we were doing. It had become our safe space, somewhere I could shop with dignity despite my limitations. That afternoon started like any other. We'd already made our way through most of the store, checking items off my list one by one. My son was being his usual helpful self, reaching up to grab a box of frozen vegetables from the top shelf when I felt my chest tightening. I quickly reached into my purse for my inhaler, something that had become second nature over the past few months. When I was taking a puff from my inhaler, trying to catch my breath, we heard the sharp sound of fingers snapping, followed by an extremely loud and rude clearing of throat. Both my son and I turned to see where the noise was coming from. Standing behind us was a woman with her hands on her hips, staring directly at my son with pure entitlement written across her face. The woman loudly demanded that my son help her with her shopping now that he was done helping me. My son looked genuinely confused for a moment before politely telling her that he didn't work at the store and was just shopping with his mother. He suggested she find an actual employee if she needed help and asked her to leave us alone. The woman's face turned red when she insisted that my son must work there since he was helping me shop. I could see my son's patience starting to wear thin, but he maintained his composure better than I probably would have in his situation. My son repeated that he did not work at the store and again told her to find an employee and stop bothering us. That's when she completely lost whatever control she might have had. Her voice reached the volume that I'm sure could be heard 3 aisles over when she screamed that she was going to get him fired and started yelling for a manager. Her screaming attracted the attention of a young employee who hurried over to see what the commotion was about. The poor girl looked barely out of high school and clearly wasn't prepared for what she was walking into. She asked if there was something she could help with. Karen's response was delivered with such venom that I actually felt sorry for the young woman. She claimed that the employee working there had been extremely rude and threatened her when she asked for help. The employee looked between my son and Karen with obvious confusion written all over her face. The employee told Karen that my son didn't work at the store. If I thought Karen was loud before, I was mistaken. Her next outburst made her previous shouting seem like a whisper when she insisted that he did work there and accused the employee of trying to cover for him. She demanded to speak to the manager immediately. The employee, clearly out of her depth, walked over to one of those customer service posts and pressed the red button. She announced over the speaker that a manager was needed in frozen foods. A voice crackled back through the speaker, confirming someone would be right there. Karen stood there with the most smug expression I'd ever seen, practically vibrating with self-satisfaction when she told my son that they would now see how long he remained employed there. When the manager arrived, he didn't even get a chance to ask what was happening before Karen launched into what could only be described as a performance. She painted herself as the innocent victim of harassment, demanding compensation for the terrible treatment she'd endured and insisting that both my son and the employee be fired immediately. The manager started to speak, saying he remembered that she was banned from the store, but Karen interrupted him with another ear-piercing screech, not letting him finish his sentence. What happened next was something I'll never forget. The manager yelled at Karen to shut up. The entire frozen food section went dead silent. Even Karen's mouth snapped shut in shock. He told her this was the second time and this was exactly the reason she had been banned for 6 months to begin with. He said she was harassing other customers, making up wild tales, and trying to get one of his employees fired. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the manager wasn't having any of it. The manager repeated his demand for her to shut up. He then told her to leave her cart where it was, get out of his store, and never set foot in it again, or he would have her trespassed and arrested. Karen stood there like a fish out of water, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The manager repeated his order for her to get out immediately and asked if he should call the police and have her escorted out the front door in handcuffs instead. I've never seen someone move so fast in my life. Karen took off running toward the exit like her life depended on it, abandoning her cart and what remained of her dignity in the frozen foods aisle. The manager turned to us with a completely different demeanor, his voice now calm and apologetic. He said he was sorry we had to endure that situation and hear him yelling, but she had it coming since this wasn't the first time she had harassed other shoppers. He asked if he could do something for us to make up for our troubles. We tried to tell him it wasn't necessary, that we were just glad the situation was resolved, but he insisted. When we finally made it to checkout, not only did he apply a 25% discount to our entire shopping trip, but he also handed each of us a $50 gift card for our next visit. About 8 months ago, I signed a contract with a smaller production facility in my area. The deal was simple. I'd invest some capital and redesign their automation systems. They thought it would take 2 years, but I was confident I could finish much faster. The facility had 50 production workers across 2 12-hour shifts, working 2 days on and 3 days off. Each shift had 2 production supervisors and 1 maintenance supervisor. During my first few weeks there, I mostly worked day shifts. I was getting familiar with their current systems and planning the upgrades. Everyone seemed decent enough, typical blue-collar workers who took pride in their jobs. The day shift maintenance supervisor was professional and his crew worked well together. I was starting to think this might be one of the smoother projects I'd taken on. Then came the shutdowns. To implement some of the major line upgrades, we needed to work nights when production was down. That's when I met the night shift maintenance supervisor. Let's just call him Richard Head, because that's exactly what he was. My first impression of Richard was actually positive. When we were introduced, he seemed friendly and knowledgeable about the equipment. He asked good questions about the upgrades and seemed genuinely interested in improving operations. I thought I'd lucked out with supervisors who actually wanted to embrace change instead of fighting it. But then I heard him on the radio. The maintenance crew used radios to communicate across the facility, and supervisors coordinated work through the same system. During my second night there, I was working near a radio when I heard Richard's voice come through. He was yelling at one of his workers about how slowly he was replacing a bearing. He told the worker that a trained monkey could have finished the job by now. The worker's response was quiet and apologetic. I figured maybe it was just a bad moment. Everyone has off days. But the week went on and it got worse. I heard Richard calling one of his maintenance workers stupid over the radio. He asked if the worker needed him to hold his hand through every simple task. He told another worker to move his fat behind faster because they had a schedule to keep and his laziness wasn't helping anyone. These were grown men with years of experience and he was talking to them like children. Worse than children, actually. What really shocked me was that none of them ever talked back or defended themselves. They just took it. The breaking point came on my fourth night. One of the maintenance workers, an older black gentleman who'd been with the company since it opened, was having trouble with a complex electrical issue. Instead of helping or offering guidance, Richard got on the radio and used a racial slur. The man had been nothing but professional and hardworking every time I'd interacted with him. I knew I had to do something. The next morning, I went straight to the plant manager's office. I told him we needed to talk about Richard Head and how he treated his maintenance crew. When he asked what about him, I explained that Richard was verbally abusing his workers. I'd heard him call them stupid, lazy, and worse. I mentioned that the previous night he had used a racial slur over the radio. The plant manager brushed off my concerns. He said that was just how things worked on the night shift. He called it friendly banter between the guys and claimed they rarely got complaints about Richard. When I suggested that maybe people were afraid to complain, he insisted Richard was a good supervisor who got results. He said if there were real problems, people would speak up. I realized quickly that the plant manager either didn't care or was willfully ignorant. He wasn't going to do anything based on my word alone. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started documenting everything. Every radio conversation, every inappropriate comment, every instance of verbal abuse. I created a detailed spreadsheet with dates, times, witnesses, and exactly what was said. I researched our state and federal employment laws to understand what rights were being violated. Most importantly, I started looking for patterns of retaliation against anyone who had tried to speak up before. It didn't take long to find them. Quietly talking to some of the day shift workers, I learned that several people had complained about Richard over the years. Every single one of them had been mysteriously terminated within a few months. The plant manager would claim performance issues or downsizing, but the pattern was clear. The worst incident happened during my final night on that shift. One of the maintenance workers, a man in his 50s who'd been with the company for decades, had requested 2 days off. His nephew had been in a serious car accident and needed multiple reconstructive surgeries. The man wanted to be there for his family during the operations. Richard berated him over the radio. He asked if the worker thought he could just waltz in and demand time off whenever he felt like it. When the worker tried to explain it was a family emergency and that his nephew was badly hurt, Richard said he didn't care about sob stories. He told the man they had work to do and he was being selfish. Richard added that maybe if he wasn't such a screw-up normally, he'd be more inclined to help him out. The man's voice cracked when he tried to explain the severity of his nephew's injuries, but Richard just kept tearing him down. I had to walk away before I lost my temper and ruined everything I'd been building. By the end of that week, I had a mountain of evidence, but I knew the workers needed to be the ones to act. I gathered the entire night shift maintenance crew after Richard left one morning. I told them I needed to show them something and that I've been documenting how Richard treated all of them. I said I thought they needed to see what I'd found. I spread out my documentation, pages and pages of verbal abuse, harassment, and violations of their rights as employees. I explained how what was happening wasn't just unprofessional, it was illegal. One worker said they appreciated what I was trying to do, but nothing was going to change because it had always been like this. Another mentioned that people had complained before and just ended up getting fired. I explained that the retaliation was actually worse than the original harassment from a legal standpoint. I pointed out that Richard used the radio for all of his abuse, which meant other supervisors heard it too. They became witnesses whether they wanted to or not. I told them I had audio recordings of some incidents and that the other supervisors would have no choice but to acknowledge what they'd heard if questioned under oath. The legal implications were serious enough that the company would have to act. When one worker asked what exactly I was suggesting they do, I told them to take the documentation and file formal complaints together. Not individually where they could be picked off one by one, but as a group. I said they should threaten legal action if necessary because the company couldn't retaliate against all of them at once, especially not with this much evidence. It took some convincing, but eventually they agreed to coordinate their complaints. We set a date for them to present everything to management together. The day they took action was incredible to watch. 8 maintenance workers walked into the plant manager's office with identical documentation and formal complaints. They presented the evidence and made it clear they were prepared to take legal action if Richard wasn't removed immediately. The plant manager's tune changed real quick when he realized the legal liability the company faced. Richard's head was terminated that same day. The transformation in the facility was immediate and remarkable. Workers who had been walking on eggshells suddenly had confidence again. The older machines, which had been constantly breaking down, started running better than they had in years. Turns out when your maintenance crew isn't demoralized and afraid, they actually do better work. Production efficiency improved dramatically. The day shift workers told me they could feel the difference. The night crew was getting more preventive maintenance done, which meant fewer breakdowns during production hours. About a week after Richard was fired, I found something attached to my office door. It was a small placard that said "Number 1 Boss," but someone had crossed out "Boss" and hand-engraved "Badass" underneath it. I took it down immediately since it wasn't professional to have hanging there, but I brought it home and put it in my office. That little placard means more to me than any performance bonus or contract completion award I've ever received. The automation project finished 2 months ahead of schedule, and the facility is now one of the most efficient operations I've worked with. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.